in spite of universal vaccination, there is some decreased incidence of hepatitis B is there. But most of the hospitals, before any invasive procedures and before blood donation, we are testing for viral hepatitis and viral screening we are doing, and we are detecting some viruses in this way also. And it is very important topic. And so, without wasting much time, now I invite Dr. Vishwanath Reddy, consultant gastroenterologist from Yashoda Hospital, Secunderabad, to speak on viral hepatitis A and E. A and E. So, Vishwanath, carry on.
Right, sir. Thank you, sir. Uh, Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure for me to present to you about viral hepatitis today. Uh, the topic for the webinar is viral hepatitis. Do alphabets matter? So, what is this alphabets business? Next slide. So, viral hepatitis actually is next slide. Viral hepatitis is actually caused by several groups of unrelated viruses. A, B, C, D, E, G. These are all the viruses which are commonly seen, and most of these are usually affecting the liver, and they cause swelling in the liver, that is inflammation, and swelling in the liver, necrosis, that is loss of liver cells, and then they present it to us with symptoms of flu-like illness. They also have symptoms of jaundice, and then they have a prolonged recovery phase. So, out of these A, B, C, D, E, G viruses, most commonly we see A, B, C, and E. Among them, today my topic for discussion is about A and E. These are usually self-limiting viral hepatitis illnesses, but B and C are little chronic and cause more damage, and this will be discussed by my colleagues. Other viruses which can affect the liver are yellow fever virus, herpes simplex virus, EBV, CMV, and dengue. A lot of viruses which can affect the liver. But for the today's topic, it is the viral hepatitis, mainly caused by this A, B, C, D, E viruses. So A and E cause acute hepatitis, B and C cause acute or chronic hepatitis. Next slide. So what is hepatitis? Hepatitis is actually a Latin word which indicates swelling in the liver. And so this hepatitis, again, as we discussed, there are several causes, A, B, C, D, E. And they actually have a very big burden in our healthcare system all over the world, not only in India, it's all over the world. It causes a lot of impact, and almost 1 to 2 million mortality every year we have because of the viruses. And these actually can be preventable because we have the vaccination available for most of them except for C. Except for C and D, we have viruses for the other groups of viruses. Next slide. So these are all the viruses apart from the A to E which we discussed. Today we are going to discuss about A to E only. Other viruses are less common causes of viral hepatitis. Next slide. So viral hepatitis A, next slide, is actually a virus. We'll discuss this in this above topics. Hepatitis A virus, epidemiology, pathogenesis, clinical features, diagnosis, treatment, and prevention. Next slide. Hepatitis A virus belongs to the hepatoviruses. Earlier, it was called as a group of enteroviruses, Picornaviridae, Heparnac virus. It is actually a spherical or icosahedral in arrangement, the structure without any capsule. It has a capsid. It is not an envelope virus. It is having an extremely stable capsid that it can resist a lot of acid as well as heat and detergents. So it's a strong virus, easily transmittable and not easily removed by routine cooking. It requires overcooking, we can say. extremely stable capsid. So it has a single stranded RNA. There are 1 serotype and 4 genotypes. Next slide. Next slide, please. So it is present all over the world with incidence of about 1.4 million per year. It can occur in a sporadic form, that is few cases once in a while, or an epidemic form, like you have a explosion of cases, like few hundreds or thousands of cases at a time. That depends on a source of epidemic. If the contaminated water is a drinking water to a large, catering a large population, it can present to us like an epidemic. Fecal-oral transmission is the main mode of transmission. Either by eating contaminated food or water, we acquire this, particularly seafood. And person-to-person transmission also by contacts. Basically, if the patient is having the virus, and sexual transmission, particularly oroanal, IV drug use and blood transfusion also can transmit the virus. So infected food handlers are the main sources of transmitting the virus. Even the children's, because it's most commonly affects the children, and overcrowding and poor sanitation contribute to it. So virus can be excreted in feces of patients during intubation period for about 3 to 5 weeks, and it is communicable from that patients from 2 weeks before the onset of illness till 1 week after the onset of jaundice. Till that period, the patient's feces will be there having the virus, which can transmit to us. Next slide. Next slide, please. So HIV hepatitis A is distributed all over the world. We can see the red areas. We are in a high endemic, high prevalent area, most of which are in the tropical territory. You can note that. Maybe we can avoid travel in these patients, in these countries, if you are not vaccinated. Next slide. Pathogenesis, humans are the main host, primary reservoirs. It can survive in water also. It is acquired by ingestion of contaminated food, and once the virus enters, it multiplies in the intestinal epithelium and then reaches the bloodstream. From there, it reaches the liver, and through the endocytosis process, it enters the liver cells, where it multiplies and destroys the liver cells, causes inflammation and further destruction of the liver tissue. HIV doesn't destroy the liver directly. It is actually our own immune response by CD8 T cells, which destroys the cells. And the newly synthesized viruses are released from the liver cells and shed into the bile duct and excreted in the feces. That's why they are transmissible during the infection process. Next slide. So when the patient comes after eating, they have a gap of about 2 to 10 weeks, and then they have the clinical illness. And clinical illness has several phases, and usually in children below 1 year age, they may have asymptomatic, that is, they may not know that they have acquired the infection. And even up to 15 years, the clinical illness is only 25%, and in adults it is 100%. They get symptoms. So what are all the symptoms? They mainly we'll discuss in the next slide. Next slide, please. Symptoms of hepatitis. Next slide. So flu-like symptoms are the main symptoms: fever, body pains, myalgias, headache. They also complain of nausea, loose motions, headache, loss of appetite, fatigue. Aversion to smoking is one characteristic symptom which is noted in these patients who are smokers. And then jaundice, we may see itching, high-colored urine and pale-colored stools, abdominal pain, discomfort, and clinically they may have icterus and tender enlarged liver. Next slide. How do we diagnose it? We diagnose it based on the clinical history, that is recent exposure or a contact or a known relative having acquired this infection, and alteration in the LFT, where we see very high levels of liver enzymes. If at all it is severe hepatitis, we can see prolonged prothrombin time as well. And to rule out other causes of jaundice, we can do a routine evaluation and ultrasound abdomen. And confirmatory test is IgM antibody of hepatitis A. This is done in the serology blood sample. We get this test. IgM indicates acute infection. IgG indicates a chronic infection. And we can also check the antigens in the blood as well as the stool. Viral culture is very difficult process in this, and molecular diagnosis with PCR is one other modality. Electron microscopy is another modality. Next slide. And some patients may go into acute liver failures with severe hepatitis. Up less than 1% may go into liver failure. These are patients usually above 50 years of age and underlying liver disease, and they present to us with encephalopathy, coagulopathy, altered liver function test. And these can be managed with conservative therapy. Sometimes we may go for plasma exchange, but ultimately some of them may land in liver transplantation requirement. Next slide. Then again, apart from the liver involvement, hepatitis A can also involve the other organs in the body, most common of which is the skin, where almost 10 to 15% of them present to us with skin rash. They can also have vasculitis involving the skin, arthritis, that is joint pains, glomerulonephritis, involvement of the kidney, cryoglobulinemia, involvement of the eyes, nerves, and heart, and also bone marrow has been described. Next slide. And few of these patients, up to 5%, can go into have prolonged cholestatic phase. That is, they'll have a jaundice which lasts more than 3 months. Usually it is less than 1 to 2 months where jaundice clears off, but some of them can go have prolonged jaundice for more than 3 months. But often it resolves spontaneously without any sequelae or any complications. Just we need to do supportive therapy. For itching, maybe we can try cholestyramine. Next slide. And for relapsing hepatitis, there are a few patients who go on to develop relapses. That is, once they have jaundice and they become normal, again they develop jaundice. This is nothing but relapsing type of hepatitis, which is seen in about 10 to 15% of these patients. And these relapses can happen between the duration of with normalcy of about 3 weeks up to extend up to last of 1 year. And these patients are potentially infectious because they have some amount of viremia and they excrete the feces in the stools, and they also have these extrahepatic manifestations which we discussed just now, and multiple relapses can be seen sometimes. We have to exclude other causes for the hepatitis which is recurring, like any obstructive pathology by doing all MRCP or ultrasound abdomen. But these patients usually recover spontaneously without any sequelae. And one thing we have to keep in mind is it can trigger autoimmune hepatitis. Next slide. For the treatment, there is no specific therapy for hepatitis A. It's only conservative management. Immunoglobulin can be tried, but it's not much use. And basically, we need to recommend a high glucose intake, and liver supportive therapy, UDC and S-adenosylmethionine can be given. And some people have tried Leaf-52, Silimarin, and other lot of medicines, but there is no proven therapy which is shown benefit in this therapy because it is often a self-limiting illness. We just need to have adequate nutrition. That is main thing. Next slide. Prevention is the best way to manage this hepatitis A. So how do we do that? We have to maintain a good hygiene and good sanitation. Avoid outside or roadside food. Travelers, like, I mean, we often eat pani puri and other things. This is often a common source of this hepatitis A. So we have to be careful about eating the outside food. And prevention, those who are going to an endemic area, we can take a vaccine. If it is more than within 3 months, we may take the immunoglobulin before going to that area. And we can take a booster of the immunoglobulin as well if you're extending the travel into that area if you're not vaccinated. So vaccine is available. We can take at any age 2 doses, 0 and 6 months apart. And combined hepatitis A and B is also available where we have to take 3 doses. Next slide. And vaccine is recommended in all these group of individuals who are very high risk of acquiring this infection. Next slide. To summarize, hepatitis A is an RNA virus which is present all over the world, but it's usually self-limiting hepatitis. It is transmitted fecal-orally and rarely with IV drug use and blood transfusion. Adults usually are symptomatic. children usually have an asymptomatic course and is diagnosed by clinical, biochemical, and serological testing. And we have to look for also extrahepatic manifestations and usually manage conservatively, but less than 1%, maybe you have the risk of fulminant hepatic failure, which you need a careful monitoring of these patients. Next slide. So then hepatitis E virus, again, it's a hepiviridae, which is more of spherical in shape, little bigger than the hepatitis A virus, is also non-envelope type. And there are two species. It is also there in tropical region. Most often you can see the red areas. India is part of it. Next slide. And incubation period is about 15 to 60 days. That is 40 days after the ingestion of that contaminated food, we get that. Here also, they'll have some clinical features similar to hepatitis A and extrahepatic features involving the blood and pancreas, neurological also have been reported. Next slide. How do we diagnose? Again, based on the clinical fixtures, history, and alteration in the LFT, where we see thousands of SGOT, SGPT elevated to thousands. And serology IgM HEV is the confirmatory test. Even if the patient has IgG and if it is rising more than fivefold, then also you have to suspect acute hepatitis E. And then RNA PCR is another way to confirm the infection. Next slide. Uh, these hepatitis E patients present similar to hepatitis A, but acute liver failure is little more common than in A. It is more so in pregnant women, particularly in the third trimester, and those who are more malnourished and those who have underlying liver disease, they are more prone for acute liver failure. It presents to us with altered sensorium, that is encephalopathy, coagulopathy, that is prolonged prothrombin time, bleeding tendency, and alteration in the LFT. It is fatal in up to 0.5 to 3%. Treatment we can just manage conservatively. We may need plasma exchange, but I think liver transplant may be needed in few of these patients. Next slide. Cholestatic hepatitis may be seen in few of these patients, particularly those who have an acute hepatitis E. 60% of them may have this prolonged cholestasis and which can last more than 3 months. Pruritus, or they can have an asymptomatic course, and it also clears off spontaneously without any sequelae. Next slide. Chronic HIV, it's actually seen in immunocompromised patients like HIV and solid organ or bone marrow transplant recipients, where the virus is seen in the blood and stool for more than 6 months. So it happens because of impaired specific T cell response against the virus. Genotypes 3 and 4 are common incriminated in this. They present to us either with fatigue or non-specific symptoms. Elevated LFT, RNA, and biopsy may show chronic active hepatitis. They may go on to develop liver cirrhosis and liver failure. What is the treatment? We have to reduce the immunosuppression and add ribavirin 600 to 1000 mg as tolerated and for 12 weeks duration. Other drugs have been tried, peginterferon and sofosbuvir. And if everything fails and patient has decompensated liver, he may have a requirement for liver transplantation as well. Next slide. And one slide on HEV in pregnancy, because in pregnant people, it is actually more dangerous compared to non-pregnant individuals, and particularly in the third trimester, the mortality is reported is up to 15 to 25%. This is probably because of alteration in the hormones like progesterone and estrogen and the immunological status. The helper T helper 2 cell type is more prominent, and there is reduced TLR expression during pregnancy. And combined with that, maybe the patients with malnutrition and also lack of access to healthcare system, maybe that is one of the reasons for a high morbidity and mortality. And fetal loss is also reported during this hepatitis E infection. And exposure to early life, maybe if the patient is exposed early, maybe if they have a recurrence of infection, they may not go on to develop a liver failure picture. Next slide. So how do we treat? Again, there is no specific medicine. There's only conservative therapy, self-limiting illness, Here again, we have to give more of glucose, and chronic hepatitis E, we have to reduce immunosuppression if they are on immunosuppression, and ribavirin can be tried. Next slide. How do we prevent that? Maintain a good hygiene and sanitation and avoid outside food, and particularly uncooked shellfish, unpeeled vegetables and fruits. And then we have vaccination is still not out in India, but it's there in China. And immunoglobulin also is not still fully evaluated. Next slide. So what is the vaccine thing? Next slide. So in China, there is actually a randomized trial in phase 3. They have done in quite a good number of people where they've given adequate doses of the virus
Fast.
and vaccine efficacy at 4.
You have to finish it fast.
Yeah, it's last slide, sir. 87% about 5 years they have the efficacy, and but there is always a question of whether there is a lifelong immunity by giving the vaccine to these patients. Next slide. And hepatitis E is an acute self-limiting hepatitis, which is seen also in mostly in the world, developing countries particularly. It's an RNA virus, again transmitted fecal-orally, also by zoonotic transmission by eating uncooked pork or swine, and this thing blood transfusion. Diagnosis is by IgM HEV and also by detecting the RNA. It can also present to us with a chronic picture, particularly in immunosuppressed individual. And ribavirin and reduced immunosuppression is mainly the therapy for chronic HEV. Prevention is the main modality for this hepatitis E, because it's a preventable infection. And then vaccine, maybe it may come in near future. That's it. Thank you.
Okay. I thank Dr. Vishwanath for his informative lecture. Now, if there are any questions, you can put it in the chat box. At the end of the talk, we can take. Or otherwise, at the end of the all talks, we can take the questions. Participants, they can put the questions in the chat box. Now I invite Dr. B. Ravishankar, HOD gastroenterologist, Yashoda Hospital, to speak on hepatitis B. Sir, Dr. Ravishankar is there, sir?
Yes, sir, it's connected actually. One moment. Dr. Ravishankar, can you please unmute your mic?
Sir, Dr. Ravishankar, sir, you have to unmute your mics.
Sir, next topic, let's continue. So, sir will continue the next.
Okay, now I invite Dr. Rakesh Kumar, consultant gastroenterologist, Yashoda Hospital, Soma, Secunderabad, to speak on hepatitis C. Rakesh.
Hello, sir. I'm audible, sir.
Yes, you are audible.
Yeah. In a second, I'm going to share the slide, sir. Are the slides visible, sir?
It's visible.
Yeah. Good evening, everybody. At the outset, I thank Dr. DC sir for the kind introduction. There is a simple slight jump in the alphabetical order, I believe. Dr. Ravishankar sir is having some issues. So instead of Hep B, I think after that good talk by Dr. Vishwanath, we are going to look into hepatitis C and its management. Before going into Hep C, one thing I want to mention is that Hep C is basically an infection of Hep C results in 85% of our patients developing chronic infection. So unlike A and E, which Dr. Vishwanath has just mentioned, which are more or less self-limiting, Hep C has a tendency of becoming chronic, and for a course of period of time, they can lead to fibrosis and cirrhosis of liver. And unfortunately, the only way these patients are detected is either they are incidentally picked up during routine medical checkup, or most of our patients of cirrhosis, when we do a workup, we pick them as HCV positive. So what my talk is going to be basically is trying to look into how we detect these patients and what are the various drugs that we have. I have just broken down my presentation into 3 compartments. We'll just have a brief look at the background of the virus and its epidemiology. Then what are the key recommendations by the various guidelines? I just try to take from the European Association of Study of Liver and the American Association. And there are certain special group of patients of Hep C who need a little bit of deviation, but for the want of time, I think I will leave it for the discussion part. I'm just going to concentrate on the background and what are the guidelines that we have presently for the treatment of Hep C. If you look at the background, let me start by taking you. Yeah. So if you look at the epidemiology, the estimated prevalence of HCV right now currently is 1% worldwide. It is 1% worldwide, which roughly corresponds to 70 million patients of Hep C. And there are nearly 4 million reported deaths every year, mostly because of cirrhosis and HCC, hepatocellular carcinoma attributed to Hep C virus. The of the genotype 1 to 6, genotype 1 and 3 are the most common causes of infection worldwide. If you look at the epidemiology in India of Hep C, it is largely restricted with high density in 3 states, that is Punjab, Mizoram, and Manipur. And among the high risk groups, HCV prevalence is most commonly seen in people with HIV, those with sexually transmitted disease, those with IV drug abuse, and those who are receiving either chronic hemodialysis or frequent blood transfusion. So these are the risk or the high risk groups in whom the prevalence of HCV is found to be very high. So what happens when once you get infected with HCV? As I have mentioned already, 85% of the patients who get infected with HCV slowly become chronic HCV infected patients. And the icteric hepatitis presentation of HCV is very rare. We do not see any acute hepatitis because of Hep C. More or less, these patients have chronic HCV infection, and over a course of years, they are either picked up incidentally or they present to us directly with cirrhosis of liver. So what happens when you are infected with HCV? The liver, there is a rapid progression for hepatic fibrosis, and which over a course of time can lead to cirrhosis, liver failure, hepatocellular carcinoma, and liver-related mortality. So the other unique thing about HCV is that this is one RNA virus that does not have a vaccine. So unlike B, we really don't have any protective mechanism. The only way forward is trying to investigate, find these patients and treat them as early as possible. So what is the goal of treatment? So if I have a patient who is found to be anti-HCV positive, my goal of treatment is to eradicate the virus completely. So what is SVR? SVR is nothing but sustained virological response to be seen at 12 weeks after therapy, and the same should be maintained at 24 weeks after the end of the treatment. And what does this do? This not only helps in decreasing the fibrosis and the necroinflammation on in the liver, it can also lead to regression of the hepatic fibrosis, that is F3 stage. And also the risk of HCC, hepatic decompensation, and the need for liver transplantation also goes down if you are able to catch this patient early and give a very aggressive treatment. So let's jump to the next section, and that's the important one, that is what are the recommendations of the various societies, whether it's the European, the American, or the Asia Pacific, regarding the management of these patients. I'm sure Dr. DC sir will agree with me that 8 years back, treating Hep C was a nightmare because the number of drugs we had were far and limited. The only drugs we had was interferon and ribavirin. These were the drugs that had too many side effects, and even the SVR that we could achieve was never more than 60%. And this entire thing has changed in the last 6 years with the availability of the directly acting antiviral agents, which are known as DAA. And these agents are very effective, and the virological SVR that you can achieve with these drugs is as high as 95 to 99%. So advent of these drugs has completely changed the scenario. Now we are able to aggressively treat these patients and achieve a very good SVR. So what are my goals of treatment? As I've just mentioned, The idea of curing HCV infection is because I want to prevent the complications of HCV related diseases, improve the patient life, and prevent the onward transmission of HCV virus. As I have mentioned, whenever I have a patient of HCV, what is my treatment endpoint? After starting the treatment, after 12 weeks, I check for the viral load. That is pre-treatment viral load, and at the end of 12 weeks. By the end of 12 weeks, the HCV RNA in the serum should be undetectable. This is the success of the treatment. And the same should also happen 24 weeks after the end of the treatment. That is called sustained virological response 24. So this is what is the target of my treatment. So who are the patients that I should be treating? All the patients with HCV infection must be considered for therapy. That must include patients who have not received any treatment, that is treatment naive, and also the patients who have previously used interferon ribavirin who are having recurrence, even they should be considered for treatment. And who should be treated very urgently? If your patient has cirrhosis, if your patient is somebody with IV drug abuse, who has a promiscuous sexual activities, women of childbearing, a patient who is on hemodialysis, these are the patients that actually should be urgently treated with HCV because they are more prone for rapid progression to fibrosis and cirrhosis. And also, even if your patient is decompensated, he is awaiting a transplant with a MELD score which is between 18 to 20, even in them, you can probably offer the treatment, especially if the waiting time for transplant is more than 6 months, then definitely these patients should be offered a pre-transplant anti-HCV treatment. And what would I do before starting? Any patient who is found to be HCV positive, before I start the treatment, I would evaluate the liver. That is an ultrasound to look at what is the stage of the liver. Is it a naive liver, fibrotic, or already cirrhosis has established? The second thing I want to look at is the renal function, because most of the drugs that are used, that the direct acting antivirals that we use, they have a significant renal excretion. So any impairment on the renal side would definitely increase the toxicity of the drugs. So if I have a patient of HCV, before starting treatment, I need a good ultrasound. I would look at his renal function test, and also I would check for HBV and A virus. And if possible, if they are negative, I would definitely give a vaccination for hepatitis B virus. So after having done my homework, I would next jump onto the drugs. As I have just mentioned, gone are the days of interferon and ribavirin. Now the availability of DAA, that is directly acting antiviral drugs, has changed the way we manage them. A 12 weeks course of one of these, two of these drugs would achieve a sustained virological response and treatment success in more than 95% of our patients. So these are the three groups of drugs that are available with us currently. But out of all these drugs, what is currently available to us? Predominantly, we are using, when I say pan-genotypic, that is HCV RNA has 6 genotypes, 1 to 6. Sofosbuvir and velpatasvir are probably the drug of choice that can be taken up for any of the genotype from 1 to 6. For the specific combinations, we have Sofo-Ledi, Omeprazole and Favipiravir and Ritonavir and Dasibuvir, Grazoprevir and Elbisavir. So these are the various drug combinations that are currently available for treatment of HCV worldwide. But what about our present Indian scenario? Of all the drugs commercially right now, the drugs that are available to us are Sofosbuvir, Daclizumab, Sofosbuvir with in combination with Ledisavir, and Sofosbuvir with Velpatasvir. These are the drugs that are currently available in India for the management of Hep C. So once you have identified a patient of hepatitis C and you have done your pre-therapeutic workup, that is ultrasound, renal function, and if you have found that the patient has a it has a liver that is not decompensated, then immediately you should offer them the treatment. And the best treatment probably would be, if the patient does not have a cirrhosis, then for the HCV, the best treatment currently in India is 12-week therapy of Sofosbuvir with Velpatasvir, whether the patient is treatment naive or treatment experienced with previous interferon and ribavirin, irrespective of the genotype, that is from genotype 1 to 6, The best treatment currently in India is sofosbuvir and velpatasvir. If it is given for a period of 12 weeks, the sustained virological response that we can achieve or the treatment success is 95 to 99%. So it's a busy slide, but this slide I have taken from the European Association of Study of Liver guidelines. The other rest of the drugs, majority are not available with us. So I feel the first column is what we should look at. Sofo and velpatasvir is the drug of choice for irrespective of the genotype, that is from 1 to 6. These are the two drugs to be given for a period of 12 weeks if your patient has chronic hepatitis C and there is no cirrhosis. Even if your patient of chronic hepatitis C, even if he has a compensated cirrhosis, that is child A, even in them, currently in India, sofosbuvir and velpatasvir are the treatment of choice, irrespective of the genotype. A treatment of 12 weeks does a good job in even a patient with compensated cirrhosis. Contraindication to therapy, the main thing we have to remember is that if your patient has a decompensated cirrhosis, that is when you should be very wary regarding which are the drugs to be used. So hep C treatment, if the patient does not have a cirrhosis, or if he has a child A cirrhosis, sofosbuvir and velpatasvir the treatment of choice. But if your patient is having child B or C, or is decompensated, or if he is having a renal disease, that is his GFR is less than 30 ml, these are the patients where the treatment has to be very selective and individualized. So we have to take them on case-to-case basis. Drug-to-drug interactions, well, these are the antivirals. They do have a lot of drug-drug interactions, but the points that you need to remember is that there are certain drugs, that anti-seizure drugs, that is especially phenytoin and carbazepine, should not be given. PPIs, especially pantoprazole, omeprazole, if your patient is already on them, either you defer the timing of your HCV drugs and the PPI. Certain cardiac drugs, they are known to be having significant drug-drug interaction. So there are quite a few of drug-drug interactions that are available. We need to just check into the appendix before starting them. So any patient, once you start them, they should be educated about the adherence to the therapy, following the recommendations, and we should check into the medication, whether the neurological or the cardiovascular, if they are on, you should check them, and probably alteration in these drugs, and you can safely continue with the HCV management. So my simplified treatment for any patient that you have found to be HCV positive and he is without cirrhosis, whether he has received any treatment prior with interferon or ribavirin or not, I think the simplest treatment is a fixed dose of sofosbuvir with velpatasvir for a period of 12 weeks, and this achieves a sustained virological response of more than 95% in your patients. The other drug regimens are currently not available in India, so I think this is probably the simplified chart I can give you. So you have a patient who is HCV positive, anti-HCV positive, check his HCV RNA prior to treatment, get an ultrasound, get an LFT creatinine, and if there is no cirrhosis, simply start them on a 12-week regimen of sofosbuvir and velpatasvir, and at the end of 12 weeks, check the RNA. If the RNA is undetectable, then you have achieved a sustained virological response for that period. Check again after 12 weeks and check again after 24 weeks after the end of the treatment. And if the HCV RNA is still undetectable, then probably you have achieved your treatment response. What about patient with severe liver disease? As I have said, these are the patients in which treatment has to be individualized, but only for a brief introduction, I will tell you, if the MELD score is less than 18, and if the patient waiting period in transplant is more than 6 months, probably this patient should be treated with HCV management. But if the MELD score is more than 20 and the transplant is imminent, then I think you should transplant them first and only then later treat them for HCV. I think the same thing for you, repetition. And what about once you have achieved a sustained virological response, after the end of the treatment, you check the virus HCV RNA virus level at 12 weeks and 24 weeks. And at both the time, if the virus is undetectable, we say that you have achieved sustained virological response. And if the ultrasound of the liver is normal, and the patient has no risk behavior or comorbidities, then actually no further follow-up is required. But if the patient already has a well-compensated liver, or if the elastography is showing a F3 or F4 fibrosis, then you should continue to do a 6 months or yearly surveillance for HCC. And in patients who have cirrhosis, do a endoscopy regularly for checking for varices. And always, if your patient has a high risk behavior in the form of IV drug abuse or promiscuous sexuality, annual monitoring should be advised for them. Thank you for your patient hearing. Any queries I would love to take at the end. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Rakesh. I thank Dr. Rakesh for this excellent presentation. Now, if there are any questions, you can put in the chat box. At the end of the talks, we can take. Now, I invite Dr. B. Ravishankar, HOD Gastroenterology, Yashoda Hospitals, to speak on hepatitis B. Sir.
Yeah, Chandrasekhar, you are able to hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'll just share my slides. Just let me know whether you are able to see the slides.
Yes, sir. We can see your slides, sir.
Yeah, okay. So now after completing A virus, E virus, and C virus, we are going to the B virus. I should have done this before Dr. Rakesh's talk, but there was some technical issue. That's why I'm coming back after Rakesh. So hepatitis B is a parenterally transmitted virus like hepatitis C, and the clinical manifestations of the virus could be acute hepatitis, fulminant hepatic failure, chronic hepatitis. Sometimes the presentation is like cirrhosis, which could be compensated or decompensated. And in a cirrhotic patient or otherwise also, sometimes hepatocellular carcinoma can develop. There also can be a presentation called occult HBV infection, where HBsAg is negative and HBV DNA could be positive. Some of the times the virus presents in pregnancy and the viral load could be high. And there is a hepatitis B carrier state, which is also commoner. So the investigations for hepatitis B infection could include various serological tests like HBsAg, HBeAg, anti-HBe, IgM-HBc, especially when acute infection is suspected. HBV DNA quantitative, not qualitative. Quantitative, very important, and sometimes genotypes can be studied, but genotyping is not very important for hepatitis B, but it's very important in hepatitis C. Now, once chronic hepatitis or some patients who might have progressed to cirrhosis of the liver, or when you're suspecting that the duration of the disease is quite long, we require endoscopy to look for varices, ultrasound abdomen, and fibroscan test. Hepatitis B serological markers are HBsAg, anti-HBs, HBeAg, anti-HBe, the IgM-HBc, HBV DNA, and sometimes the genotypes. Well, we need to use these serological markers depending on the type of presentation. Suppose there is an acute hepatitis that is suspected, we need to do IgM-HBc and HBsAg. And if a chronic hepatitis is suspected, HBeAg, anti-HBe, and HBV DNA are to be done. So we need to separate out and do the tests what are required. Sometimes a profile is done where all the tests could come, but what is needed that could be tested. In chronic hepatitis B, there are two types, which is HBe antigen positive and HBe antigen negative hepatitis. We'll not go into the complexity of this in this forum, but HBeAg negative doesn't mean that all is well, especially if HBV DNA is high. So in a patient who is suspected to be having HBsAg, who is having HBsAg and who generally healthy, so what are the tests that are required? Some clinical details, basic physical examination, liver function test, HBeAg and anti-HBe and HBV DNA as required. If HBV DNA is low, liver function test is normal, and these patients could be considered as carriers. But in the carrier state, there could be healthy carriers, there could be unhealthy carriers. And to treat a hepatitis B suspected carrier state, the HBV DNA should be more than 2000 at least, and liver function test should be abnormal. So when the liver function test is normal, HBV DNA is less than 2000, usually treatment is not required and a close follow-up of these patients is required. Why hepatitis B patients require treatment? Because there can be a progression to cirrhosis of the liver. These are the stages of liver fibrosis, progression from F0 to F1, F2, and F3, F4, F4 being cirrhosis. And sometimes the patient is totally asymptomatic, the disease has progressed, and we require certain modalities, indirect modalities, and certain direct modalities to diagnose fibrosis and cirrhosis. To diagnose fibrosis sometimes is very important, especially when viral load is high, liver function test is normal. If there is F2 fibrosis, one may have to consider treatment. And the fibrosis assessment modalities could be FibroScan, ARFI, shear wave elastography, MR elastography, and the gold standard being the liver biopsy. These machines, modified latest ultrasound machines, they detect shear wave elastography and ARFI. MR elastography is very important to show the fibrosis scores and overall assessment of the liver, and the FibroScans are very useful in assessing the fibrosis. So once we have got a patient who has got the viral markers and who has got certain LFT abnormalities and fibrosis is detected in these patients, and fibrosis is detected in chronic patients and not in acute patients. And the drugs that have been available are interferons, the nucleotide analogs, and we have among the tenofovir we have TDF and tenofovir alafenamide. That is one that is commonly used nowadays. And the newer drugs are under trial. They could be single agents or in combinations. So the mechanism of action of interferon has a peculiar type of mechanism, and the nucleoside and nucleotide analogs inhibit the HBV polymerase. Nowadays, interferons are less frequently used for hepatitis B, whereas interferons were used about 10 years back, were very frequently used, but presently nucleoside or nucleotide analogs are being used for hepatitis B treatment. And these have been the doses of regulated interferons, not of much importance in the present day. So the oral therapy of HBV infection constitutes mainly the highlighted ones, that is in the red, that is entecavir and tenofovir are the main drugs that are utilized for hepatitis B infection. And the latest drug that is available is the TDF, 25 milligrams once daily is the drug that is commonly used. And of course, people do use entecavir as well. So the summary of treatment of hepatitis B involves the acute hepatitis presentation requires a symptomatic treatment, fulminant hepatic failure, symptomatic treatment, and transplantation. Of course, we understand that fulminant hepatic failure is acute hepatitis with loss of sensorium, and these patients are quite sick because the significant amount of liver necrosis occurs and these patients require ICU care. For chronic hepatitis B, oral nucleoside or nucleotide analogs, interferon has been a treatment, but not an option, great option now. In cirrhosis of the liver, oral nukes are used, symptomatic treatment needs to be given, and at certain stage when the MELD score is high, transplantation needs to be considered. But n number of patients of cirrhosis who have been subjected to nuke therapy have been removed from the list of transplantation because significant improvement has been seen. And these patients need to take treatment for at least 6 months before significant symptomatic responses are seen. In carrier state, observation is done, but we need to understand whether the carrier is healthy carrier or an unhealthy carrier. In the unfortunate event of hepatocellular carcinoma development, loco-regional treatments are to be given. Then transplantation can also be considered in certain indications. In pregnancy, when there is a high viral load, oral drugs are to be given. So there are certain new targets apart from the interferons and the nucleotide analogs. The importance of the newer treatment has come because it has been understood that the cccDNA remains in the nucleus despite absence of DNA in the peripheral blood. And we all know that the hepatitis B can come back in a big way, especially after chemotherapy, after immunosuppressive therapy, and in patients who have stopped the treatment. The nuke therapy is to be given indefinitely, and there is no definite guideline when we have to stop the nuke therapy. That is why the newer treatment modalities are appearing, where they target the cccDNA. If this can be targeted, we are going to get new modalities of treatment. And to target that cccDNA, which is in the main picture in the nucleus, there is an integrated HBV DNA in the chromosomes of the nucleus of the host cell, and additionally extrachromatic cccDNA is there. And the red indicates that cccDNA is targeted, and the green drugs target the extranuclear, that is cytoplasmic, or when the attachment or when the release of these virions occur. That these are the various targets. Well, in this seminar, we cannot go into all the details of these newer modalities, but the newer modalities which target the cccDNA give long-lasting cure, and these are called direct-acting antivirals. And there are also certain other mechanisms like gene therapy and other things where HBV cccDNA is targeted. And when direct-acting antivirals are to be used, there can be a combination of medications where, apart from the DAAs, other mechanisms like NABs, CAMs, so on and so forth are to be used. And anyway, this is still in the research, and this has to come. If at all this targeting of cccDNA occurs, will be at a great benefit, and the patients will get rid of the B virus. So what are the other aspects of hepatitis B infection? The vaccination schedules, we are not going to go into all the details, but I have just mentioned the schedules and the post-exposure prophylaxis, especially if there is a needle stick injury. We need to treat with a passive immunity and the active immunity. The doses are mentioned here. And pregnancy with a high viral load, mainly at 2 lakh international units, they require treatment with drugs like tenofovir, and the drugs of the nucleotide analogs are to be in infrequent doses in hepatitis B with CKD. In post-transplant, the nukes can be administered, and hepatitis B in liver transplantation, there can be a high versus low dose of HBIG plus nukes versus nuke therapy. All these are complex issues which have to be handled in a given situation. So concluding, hepatitis B infection, the prevention is better than cure, and proper evaluation if HBsAg is positive depending on the clinical situation. Quantitative DNA estimation, though expensive, is a must, and antivirals useful in chronic hepatitis B are useful in chronic hepatitis B and also in acute severe disease. Antivirals are a must in cirrhosis and also in decompensated cirrhosis, but at the same time, when the decompensated cirrhosis is progressing, we need to consider transplantation. Antivirals are useful in post-liver transplant subjects, and oral therapy in the last weeks of pregnancy prevents transmission to the newborn. So that covers the entire hepatitis B in a nutshell, and I have not gone into all the recommendations and other things, but I have given an overview of hepatitis B. Thank you so much. Thank you, Chandrasekhar.
Thank you very much, sir, for that informative lecture. Can you stop screen? Now I invite Dr. Bharani to speak on consultant gastroenterologist at Yashoda Hospital, Secunderabad, to speak on hepatitis D.
Thank you, sir. I hope I'm audible to everybody.
Yes, you are audible.
Yeah. So I will talk briefly on hepatitis C. First of all, good evening, everyone. So hepatitis D, it was first discovered in 1977, and it was originally thought to be a unrecognized antigen of the hepatitis B virus because it always occurred in patients who are already infected with hepatitis B. So also known as a delta antigen, the specialty is that it requires a hepatitis B surface antigen for transmission. So virions can multiply individually within the liver cells, but for transmission, they require the hepatitis B surface antigen. So globally, 5% of HBsAg carriers are HDV infected, and the prevalence seems to be very high in Mediterranean region and also in the Middle East and Central Africa and also in the Amazon basin. So in India, the reported prevalence is, there is very limited data available. but purely based on serological studies, published literature source from 0 to 62%. A recent study done in Delhi in 2020 November showed a prevalence of 0.78%. So if you look at the map, so you can see the red colored areas are areas of high prevalence. You can see India, our country, is in a low prevalent area, while Pakistan, it has shown to have a high prevalence of HDV infection. So various genotypes within the HDV virus have been described from 1 to 8. While genotype 1 is present globally, genotype 3 has been shown to be associated with more severe hepatitis and development of acute liver failure. Whether the treatment response to various genotypes differs, it's not known, but genotype 3 has been shown to have a better off treatment response. We all know the structure of hepatitis B virus. So the HDV structure, you can see the centrally placed, that is a ribonucleoprotein HDV genome, which is surrounded by the hepatitis B surface particle. And so because, with the use of this surface antigen, it enters the hepatic cell, and it is in the envelope is released, and the ribonucleoprotein is internalized into the nucleus, where it replicates by using the host RNA polymerases. And after synthesis of the virion, it released into the cytoplasm, where it again takes up the HBsAg envelope antigen and is released into the stream. So any type of hepatitis can occur with HDV, both acute and chronic, and it is transmitted parenterally. So the main routes of infection are blood transfusion and IV drug use. The point to be noted here is the perinatal transmission, which is very common in hepatitis B, is uncommon in hepatitis D virus infection. So the cell death can be due to direct cytotoxic effects, or it can be a host-mediated immune response. So who should be tested? The routine consensus guidelines do not recommend routine testing for all individuals who are hepatitis B positive. So who should be tested? Whether a patient presenting with acute hepatitis B with risk factors for HDV, that is IV drug use, or patients coming from an endemic area, and patients who are having a very severe and protracted hepatitis should be tested for HDV. And in patients with chronic hepatitis B, the same risk factors, that is IV drug use or endemic areas, or any unexplained fear of hepatitis B where the reason is not known, where the patient is hepatitis B positive and the HBV DNA levels are negative, but the patient is rapidly progressing with active hepatitis and rapidly progressing to cirrhosis, then we should consider testing for hepatitis D. So if at all the decision has been taken, what diagnostic tests are initially used? We should obviously test for HBsAg. And the next comes the IgM anti-HBC core antibody testing, along with IgM anti-HDV, that is hepatitis D antibody, which is released in an acute hepatitis individuals. Other diagnosis with HDV RNA is also used, and it's very sensitive test for diagnosing both acute as well as chronic. But chronic HDV only we can rely on HDV RNA levels, not levels, positivity of the HDV RNA for diagnosing a chronic HDV. And liver biopsy with immunohistochemistry for hepatitis D antigen is also rarely used. It can be rarely used. So how to interpret the serology? So if we, the HDV infection, it presents in three ways actually. One is infection as a co-infection along with hepatitis B, as a super infection in a patient who is already hepatitis B positive and presenting as a chronic HDV infection. So if we see the markers, obviously in all patients, hepatitis B surface antigen positivity is a prerequisite. And if IgM anti-HBC, that is if a core antibody is positive, along with the IgM anti-HDV positive, then it's a co-infection. And if IgM anti-core antibody is negative with a positive IgM anti-HDV, it is a super infection. So this is how we differentiate between a co-infection and a super infection. And in a chronic HDV patient, though all are positive, the main marker and which is persistently elevated is the HDV RNA levels. And we also sometimes we can see IgM anti-HDV, which can be persistently positive, and IgG, that is a total HDV, can also be persistently positive in a chronic HDV patient. So this graphs interpret how the levels of antibody decline with in a co-infection and a super-infection. So if you can see all HDV co-infections, the outcome will be total recovery. Like that means the development of anti-hepatitis B surface antibody occurs with recovery. Total recovery occurs with decline in all HDV RNA levels as well as loss of HBsAg, with decline in antibody IgM, and total antibodies also decrease. But as well in a super infection, the symptoms may prolong. And if you can see, the patient is already hepatitis B HBsAg positive and the HDV RNA levels continue. So they are persistently elevated. That means these are these are the patients who become chronically infected with HDV. And we can see that the total anti-HDV levels, unlike in co-infection, has not decreased. It remains positive. So naturally, as I told, acute co-infection, it spontaneously resolves in more than 90% of the cases, but rarely acute liver failure can occur, and it is more common than with a HBV monoinfection. While in superinfection, more than 90% progress to chronicity, and they can land up with a decompensation or an ACLF. While the course for chronic HDV is variable, many patients can remain in a chronic hepatitis phase, but they fastly progress to cirrhosis, or in a chronic HDV, there is increased risk of hepatocellular carcinoma development. And finally, coming to treatment, for a acute hepatitis D virus infection, the treatment is mainly supportive, and if ALF develops, then they should be a candidate for liver transplantation. And in a chronic HDV, individualized approach is followed. Initially, interferon alpha were used. Now, pegylated interferons are being used, and duration of therapy is different. I mean, various studies have suggested duration up to some studies have recommended only 1 year, but most studies recommend duration for at least 2 years. And the loss of this HDV RNA seems to be around 25 to 40% at the end of even after 2 years of therapy. And whether the nucleotide analogs can be used, it is also studied in various groups, but they have not shown to be of any added benefit. But if the treatment of HBV is also required, then an addition of that nucleotide or nucleoside analogs can be considered. So who should be treated? Any patient with combined HBV and HDV infection with elevated serum ALT along with the high DNA levels, HDV RNA levels, and a chronic hepatitis and biopsy are the candidates who should be considered for treatment. And the endpoints was to suppression of the RNA levels 24 weeks after completing treatment. But this sustained treatment response was observed in very less patients in all these studies. And the other secondary endpoint was loss of HBsAg, which is very difficult to achieve. So my last slide is with prevention. And primary prevention is by vaccinating individuals who are hepatitis B negative, and chronic HBV carriers are always a risk of developing HDV. So they should be educated and counseling on behavioral methods. So newer therapies which are still on the investigation phase are HDV entry inhibitors or viral assembly inhibitors and virion secretion inhibitors. They are not still available. So with this, I end my presentation. Thank you, sir.
I thank Dr. Bharani for the very informative lecture. Now all the topics are open for questions and comments. No. First, my question to Dr. Rakesh. Is there any role for genotypic testing before starting the treatment for hepatitis C? Because now the treatment is available is pan-genotyping. So any role
Yes,
for
sir. No, I mean, previously when we were using interferon ribavirin, they did have a real role to play. Genotype decided the duration and the type to be given. But with the available of pan-genotype directly acting antivirals, especially the sofosbuvir and velpatasvir, I think genotype determination has gone down, sir. Now, I think we can straight away in a patient who is just Hep C positive, well compensated cirrhosis or just a fibrotic liver, we can straight away start them on velpatasvir and sofosbuvir without checking for genotypes.
And is there any role for ribavirin also in the treatment of hepatitis C?
Sir, the utility of ribavirin has gone down, sir, but in still it has utility in a certain subset of patients, sir, especially if the patient is child B and C. There are certain situations where along with the dual direct antiviral therapies, we may require to add ribavirin just to increase the SVRs in these patients.
Thanks, Dr. Rakesh.
Yes, sir.
Next question is Dr. Ravisankar, sir. Sir, what is the, after starting the therapy in HBeAg negative chronic hepatitis B, when we have to stop? Stopping is the main question. A lot of people before starting therapy, the patients ask how many days we have to take the treatment. So how can we tell the patients when to stop the therapy? That is the main concern.
With the present given regimens, Chandrasekhar, I think with the nukes, when we use this tenofovir or the entecavir, there is no definite endpoint of stopping the treatment. So the stopping rules are not well laid down. The treatment should be continued for at least 3 to 4 years. Then we can consider again performing all the tests, including HBV DNA. At a regular basis, we do perform and again checking the HBV DNA, then HBeAg, development of anti-HBe, then loss of HBsAg, which usually doesn't occur, and development of anti-HBs. All these rules, if they are if they are there, then we can say that we could try to stop. But this HBsAg loss and anti-HBs development will never occur with the nukes. And once we stop the drug, there are quite a few cases where the HBV DNA reappears and there can be development of hepatitis again. That is why the role for new drugs is coming up. The drugs that target the CCC DNA are required. So till then, we cannot say that there are definite rules for stopping the drug and we can try and stop the drug. But in certain situations, we have tried and stopped the drug and we have followed up these patients, and some have done well. They maintained the HBV DNA negativity, but some patients there has been a the HBV DNA has come back and again we have to restart the drugs. There is no definite rule that when we can stop the drug, but a persistent negativity, and after stopping the drug, regularly follow up these patients and do the tests, then in some patients we can withdraw the drug.
So patients needs close follow-up after stopping therapy.
Definitely, very close follow-up even after stopping, and the testing needs to be done perfectly. And any relapse or any comeback of the viral DNA, we need to be extremely careful in these patients and again restart the medication.
So is there any role for liver biopsy after this fibroscan and all the things? Still there is any role for liver biopsy in the hepatitis?
Liver biopsy, which was once about 15 years back or 10 years back, was some sort of a regularly performed procedure, has now been, set in a corner, and it is not a modality of investigative modality of choice, because the fibroscans and other scans like MRE and others have come up in a big way and they give us a diagnosis and amount of fibrosis. So right now, as such, majority of the times we never do a liver biopsy, except in suspected hepatocellular malignancy, where again the curative modalities cannot be offered. These patients are performed a needle aspiration for diagnosing hepatocellular carcinoma. Otherwise, for majority of the times, there is no indication for liver biopsy.
Okay. So question to Dr. Vishwanath. Is there what is the dietary advice for acute hepatitis? Because patients, they have a lot of doubts on dietary things. So what is there any particular diet or anything?
Yeah, definitely. Diet is very important part of therapy because we don't have any specific therapy for the treatment of this disease. So basically they need a lot of glucose supplementation, which is helping in detoxification or recovery of the liver. And there is also tendency for hypoglycemia whenever there is severe hepatitis. So we should give adequate glucose supplementation. So plenty of glucose. We ask them to take Glucon-D, or we ask them to take fruit juices, or we ask them to take sugarcane juice, and avoid all oily food. There is also stigma that we should have zero oil. We should not take turmeric. There's nothing like that. Our body requires some amount of oil, so we have to take some amount of oil, and this turmeric is also okay in these patients. We can ask them to take only vegetarian diet. Non-vegetarian is difficult to digest in patients with liver problem. So I think acute hepatitis, probably we ask them to have a carbohydrate rich diet, predominantly vegetarian type, and have plenty of fruits and take adequate rest. That should be sufficient advice.
I think Vishwanath is hitting at acute hepatitis.
But
Yeah.
mainly acute hepatitis. Sir.
Yeah,
Acute-
mainly as because he has dealt with the A and E. Yeah.
Salt restriction and high protein diet, that is okay, sir. Mainly patients have a lot of doubts on diet in the acute hepatitis. That is the thing.
Yeah, I
Sir,
think.
one more question to you, sir. What is the, before starting chemotherapy, what precautions we should take in hepatitis?
Seminar అవుతుంది జర్నీలో ఉన్నాం.
Yeah. In HBs AG positivity, even if HBV DNA is negative, if we are contemplating to give immunosuppressive therapy like cancer chemotherapy, then we have to start prophylactic antivirals. That means,
Thank you.
to clarify again, if a patient is HBs AG positive, HBV DNA positive, definitely we have to give the treatment. If HBV DNA is negative, HBs AG is positive, then we have to give prophylactic antiviral therapy. Otherwise, the viral DNA would increase and there could be development of severe hepatitis. So one should not forget to screen for hepatitis B, especially if a chemotherapy or immunosuppressive therapy is being contemplated. So all patients who are requiring chemotherapy should undergo hepatitis B screening, so that prophylactic and preventive antiviral therapy is given to these patients.
But can I ask a question?
Okay.
So recently I had a case from a physician. I got a call, COVID positive patient who had severe pneumonia, and they were contemplating and planning to start him on steroid therapy, and he was found to be HBsAg positive. So they were asking me whether to start him on therapy or not.
Yeah.
In this case, what is the HBV DNA level?
That's what I asked them to do, sir. But even if
Right.
I tried to check the literature, but I couldn't find anything. For such a short course of steroid, whether it's really required or not.
But
Or I think steroid usage, it is not.
It is a short course of steroid, only close follow-up is needed, I think. You cannot start antivirals.
Exactly.
Only with close follow-up, we can monitor the patient. I don't think he needs.
I don't think, sir. I don't think we should start concomitant treatment, sir, because steroid won't be more than 2 to 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Only close
We should
follow-up.
just follow up. Yes, sir. Sir, one question to Ravi Shankar, sir. In patients who have co-infection of Hep B and C, sir, how you want to go about? Co-infection of hepatitis B and C.
Well, we need to do evaluation in these patients. Suppose there is anti-HCV positivity and HBsAg positivity. This is the situation Dr. Rakesh is posing. So we need to do further testing in the form of LFT, HCV RNA quantitative, HBV DNA quantitative, E antigen and E antibody. Suppose predominantly it's a disease of B virus, we have to target the B virus. Suppose predominantly it is a disease involving C virus replication, we have to go after the C virus. But if both the viruses are replicating, both the viruses, the HCV RNA is high and HBV DNA is high. We need to handle both the viruses. So we need to give treatment for HCV in the form of sofosbuvir plus velpatasvir and either entecavir or tenofovir. One of the drugs needs to be given to these patients, and again monitoring of both needs to be done. Rakesh, are you satisfied with the
Yes.
answer?
Yes, sir. The reason why I asked this question was that prior, when we had interferon ribavirin, sir, there was a lot of discussion and dilemma as to how to go about. But now that we have a 12-week short course of HCV in the form of drugs, can we straight away start the patient on sofosbuvir and velpatasvir, finish it by the end of 12 weeks, and just keep continuing the tenofovir if required?
Exactly. I think that's
Way
what
to
we
go.
need to do. That's what we need to do.
And one more important advice for this HBsAg positive patients is to screen all family members and to give vaccines. Sir. That is also one important thing.
Exactly.
So there are no more questions in the chat box. Sir. Shall we end the webinar, sir?
Okay,
Hello?
Chandrasekhar. Yeah,
Okay.
Chandrasekhar,
Yes,
sure.
I thank all the speakers for their excellent presentations, and I thank Yashoda Group of Hospitals for giving me the opportunity. With this, I will end this webinar.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you all.